Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus mini-sodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive mini-sode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Our guest on today's show is Bindiya Schaefer. Bindiya is an author, and she has a book that she's written called Corinth 2642 AD, which is a sci-fi thriller that tackles race as a construct. She's a former defense and aerospace journalist. Before moving to the San Francisco Bay Area, where she currently lives, she lived in Dubai, UAE, and Bangalore, India. When she's not writing, she is camping in the California wilderness, where it is gorgeous, and she also writes her books. And her husband and her baby dog are right there by her side. We are so excited to have on today's show and welcome a very, very warm welcome to Bindiya Schaefer. Hello, Bindiya. Welcome to the World of Difference podcast.
Hey, Lori. How's it going?
It's going great. I can't believe we're neighbors and we're actually on Zoom. Maybe we'll get to meet in person at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're probably just a couple of minutes away from where I live.
I am. I know. I think I am. So it would be fun to have coffee sometime. But I'm
that would be
excited
nice.
to get to know you a little bit and introduce you to the World of Difference podcast listeners everywhere. You have a very global background. So many of us do here on the podcast. And so we'd love to know a little bit about your background and who you are and what you're currently doing.
Cool. So I am from India. I was born there. I grew up there for a little bit. And not long after, I think I was probably like 9 or 10, and my family moved to Dubai, to UAE. And I fell in love. I lived there for another 10 years before I moved back to India. And while I was in India, I worked as a defense and aerospace journalist. That was quite a challenge, being a woman in India working in a very male-dominated industry. And at some point, I decided, things have got to change. I got to make more money, travel more. And somehow I found myself in California. I got myself a corporate job. I call it moving over to the dark side. I quit journalism and went to the corporate world. And I've been here 4 or 5 years. And I write on the side.
Yes. So many people here in the Silicon Valley are doing like several things at once. Yeah, it's very common to meet people with what feels like 3 full-time jobs, sometimes just for practical reasons because it's so expensive, but other reasons are also just people are very driven here in the Silicon Valley. So I feel like you're a good fit for that.
Oh my gosh, no, it's true. I feel like ever since I moved here, I'm in this constant state of what else am I doing? What can I be doing? Like, am I doing enough? It's this constant push and pull, the struggle of, what am I doing now that my future self is going to thank me for 5-10 years from now? And that's my constant state of mind now.
Yes, I know, isn't it, for so many of us? And
Yeah,
COVID sort of really threw that into a strange new level because I was
yeah.
reading, and you've probably seen some of this too. It's like some companies were discovering that their full-time employees had a whole other full-time job at another company. Like it's like, because when you're on Zoom, I guess that can happen. It was just like, what in the world is going on?
No,
So,
and that makes total sense because you don't actually need to be in the office 9 to 5. You're not constantly working, so you could theoretically multitask.
yeah, some people are just really that driven to be doing
Yeah.
that. And I think that somehow they were pulling it off for a long time before
Yeah,
even
no,
anyone knew.
I couldn't do it.
I know I couldn't either. Exactly. It's like you have to breathe, and that many Zoom calls I think would really, do me in, because I'm not really one of
Yeah.
those who can just sit all day on Zoom. Like
Oh
the
my
the movie
gosh.
Wall-E. I was thinking of that because we were in Disneyland with our kids recently, and I don't know if you ever saw the movie Wall-E, but it's like these people that are just sitting in front of screens. It's like a futuristic movie. They're sitting in front of screens and they're just in these chairs kind of moving along, and they just get fatter and fatter because they're drinking sodas while they're just on screens all the time. And it was like, I don't know how many years ago this movie was, but it was like, was that like a prophetic movie about the future? Because in some ways I feel like in COVID, that was our
Yeah.
lives for a year and a half.
Yeah, I have COVID-15.
Yeah,
I
that's
gained 15 pounds these 2 years.
so true. Oh my gosh. Wow. So you spent time as a defense and aerospace journalist. Tell us
Correct.
about that. And what did you learn during that time?
Oh my gosh. So that was a complete and total accident. I started my career actually at a newspaper in Bangalore. And I didn't really enjoy it. It wasn't good culture. I loved the work itself, but the culture didn't resonate with me. And I was thinking, what do I do? Like, because I love journalism, but what do I do? And someone somewhere, they emailed me and said, hey, this website is looking for journalists. Do you want to interview? And I said, "Oh, they're never going to hire me. I don't have a background in defense and aerospace." But the interview went fantastic. The editor and I, we hit it off. And yeah, 2 weeks later, I was starting, and it was quite the learning curve. And I look back and, I didn't recognize it at the time, but now I do. I'm so grateful for my editor because he really took me under his wings, educated me, mentored me, taught me the ropes. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have survived that first year because I had no idea what people were talking about. Like, I'm sorry, what is an RFP? What does an engine do? Radars? I don't know. What are these words?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Wow.
I fell in love. It was absolutely rewarding. I learned so much. I met fantastic people. Gave me an opportunity to travel the world. What more could I ask for?
That's incredible. What a very unique experience that you had there. And I
Yeah,
assume that some of that learning, number one, it was obviously the gratitude of having this person who mentored you, and also just the way that taught you how to lead and do that for the next person is so valuable. But the
absolutely.
very specific aspects of learning about defense and aerospace as a journalist, my assumption is that played into your book in some form or fashion in this latest book that you've written. So tell us about it.
Right. So a lot of defense and aerospace journalism, everything that's happening today is incredibly futuristic. When, let's say, the United States buys an airplane or they're building something, it's meant to be used in the future. It's from concept to launch, it's going to be 15, 20 years in the future. So it was easy for me to write the book from that aspect because that's what I was trained to do. I was trained to think about what is the aerospace industry going to look like 50, 60 years from now. So a lot of the book has incredibly futuristic technology that is already in production right now, but it's not central to the story. What's central to the story is the concept of race in the future. How do we as humans think of racial identity 600 years from now? And the answer is, well, we don't, because 600 years from now, we're probably so completely intermixed and racial, because of globalization, war, whatever. We're not going to identify ourselves by the color of our skins. And that's the story.
It's
That's the
so
crux of it.
wonderful. Yeah, I love the thought of it. I think that's what, fiction can do for us. It can allow us to imagine a reality that doesn't exist yet and dream for it and work for it. And it sounds like that's the kind of book that you've written for us to activate our imaginations of what we could do now to be the kind of change makers, to create a world and a society everywhere we live where people aren't judged by the color of their skin. So
Yeah.
I assume that you being an immigrant here in the United States was a factor in this. Tell us about your experience of being an immigrant and how it played into this book.
I think California is the most wonderful place I've ever lived in. This is where I feel or have ever felt most at home, where I feel like I can really fit in, have a community, friends. But on the other hand, it's also where I've experienced the most racism,
Wow.
right? I've experienced it within my immediate circle of friends, at work, at the grocery store. It's sometimes so small, it takes me like a couple of days to even like think back and think, oh, wait a second, that wasn't right. And I this idea for the story, it just, it cropped up at a time where I was experiencing it a lot more. And I get so emotional talking about it because that time in my life was just really challenging. And my husband is German, he's white, and I just didn't have the vocabulary to explain to him what I was feeling and why these things weren't right. Because he can sympathize with me, but he doesn't walk in my shoes. He has no idea what it's like to feel this way. And so that was essentially the idea for the book. And I was saying, oh my gosh, 50, 60 years from now, America is going to be, I mean, Caucasians will probably be the minority. And I was on this, really angry tangent. And that was the book. And I said, we're not talking about it because we're not thinking about it. This is what the world is going to be like. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, already for the younger generation, it already is that way for, younger ones. So it's only a matter of time before that scenario is starting to play out, right? And so it's happening, like you said. So I'm really just want to say I'm so sorry that you have experienced that here in California. And I hear that story over and over again. I think it's shocking to a lot of people that even in the Bay Area, which is considered a very inclusive environment, where it's very diverse and all those things are true, but it also is true that there have been quite a few hate crimes against Asians in particular that either have just begun to be more often reported or are statistically the same as they always have been. They just are now only starting to be reported. And it's hard to know since they weren't actually reported, but the anecdotal information I get from a lot of my Asian American friends is that these things have been going on for quite some time, and we're hearing more about them. So what are your thoughts around some of the Stop Asian and API hate that's, the awareness that's been raised? And I'd love to hear your thoughts as an immigrant and somebody who's experienced some of those things.
First of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. The API, I feel like something changed during the pandemic. It was like a switch went off and people were like, I'm done. Like, I'm done taking the shit. That's what it felt like. Because I have a ton of Asian friends and a lot of them really suffered, I want to say, during the pandemic. Like, getting groceries was suddenly a challenge, walking down the street, because it was very much an in your face experience, and my heart breaks for them. And I've had a few similar experiences, but nothing at all compared to what they experienced. And I think what it really is that people are tired. We're tired of, being berated on the streets, being challenged for being different, and people are speaking up. I think there's this idea that there's a safe environment where I'm free to speak up my truth, to explain what's happening to me, and there's freedom in being understood, and that's really been the tipping point, I think. Acceptance.
Yeah. It was almost like we went through so many hard things during that time. And so I think that people can only take so much. So I'm definitely hearing that same story from a lot of my friends who've experienced different things. I mean, I have a dear friend who, for years, their family way back have been here in California. And she, many years ago, was walking down the street in their neighborhood in Santa Clara with her daughter, and somebody yelled at them, "Go back to where you came from," which the daughter interpreted to mean, "Go back to your house."
To Santa Clara.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, but then it was like her mom knew it meant something else. And it's like that awful conversation a mom has to have with the daughter who's been born and raised here, and her mom has too, but it's like, and it's the Bay Area, so you don't expect that because there's so much awareness in so many circles around that, but then there are still particular ones that aren't. And so that diversity includes the people who also, overtly express a lot of racism and hatred and vitriol to the point of yelling at a total stranger, all of that. And so, yeah, it's just heartbreaking that those are the kind of conversations that parents are having to have with children, even now in 2021. I hate that.
Yeah.
But when I think about your book and I think about this, beautiful scenario that could be if we did the work, both individually and systemically, and had these kind of more vulnerable, authentic conversations where we can be real with people who are different from us. I think that's a path forward. Does your book address anything about that in the book, about how it got to be that way?
So I imagine that, it was just honestly the example of my husband and I was saying, if we had kids and those kids had other kids, and they might, and all of our friends are either immigrants or Americans, and I was saying, and if they married each other and they had other kids, what would they be? I don't know. They would probably just be American, right? Because like, what are you gonna say? I'm 25% Indian, 5% German. I don't know. Like, can you imagine how ridiculous that will be? And I said, no, at some point we're just gonna start saying we're Americans, and there won't be a follow-up question saying, but where are you really from? Because everyone is the same and yet different. But I also think for this scenario to really come to pass, there's people are going to travel a lot more. I think, I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to spoil it for readers, but I think there are certain things that have to happen in our future for it to be a complete one world, as I phrase it.
Yeah,
but also in that scenario, I think it's not going to be a true one world, because in the book, I imagine that there are going to be certain groups of people who hold on to their ideas of being pure-blooded, and essentially how those communities fit into the larger world, because the scales have tipped and now you're the minority, and this is what the rest of the world looks like. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's fascinating to think about. In the US, we have this holiday, Thanksgiving, that has various narratives around what actually happened and what actually led up to that. So, in some, schools in the US, it'll still be taught that the Puritans were, that the whole idea of Puritan only related to like a pure form of their faith, being able to practice religious freedom. But it turns out the more full picture of that is that many of the Puritans believed that they were a pure race, that it wasn't only about faith, that it also had this additional kind of nefarious element that wasn't related to their faith at all. In fact, it went quite against their faith to believe that they had a pure race by being, so-called white skin. I don't know if that's what they called it at the time, but that, and so that there was a superiority complex with these, white British and European individuals that came, and that some things surrounding that Thanksgiving story were not exactly cute, and like you would make little dolls out of it. I mean, yes, there were good moments, but there's a lot of nuance there. And so, yeah, I'd be interested to know, as an immigrant from India and having lived in other countries and Dubai and everything, and living now in the States for the last several years, like, what is your perspective on that? And what have you heard that you think is good and bad and all of that?
So I really struggle with Thanksgiving. When I first got here, I was so excited. I thought, oh my gosh, this is, like the quintessential American thing. Or we did Friendsgiving with friends, and then I started to educate myself. I was watching documentaries, reading books, and I realized, oh boy, this is not what I expected it to be at all. And the more I read and the more I learned, I just cannot, digest the idea of sitting down and having a meal and celebrating this holiday that was actually so painful for so many thousands of people who are already living in this country. That breaks my heart, and I can't reconcile the fact that we're celebrating essentially the genocide of the Native Americans. Yeah, that's where I'm at with Thanksgiving right now.
Yeah, no, it's, I think sometimes it's shocking to a lot of particular Americans who've been raised in a system that was only taught the one version of the story, which is why on the World of Difference podcast, we love to get the different perspectives, because no one has the only perspective that for all time, for all, people of any particular thing. It's like we can all watch the same accident happen on street, and my perspective being on the left side of the road, somebody's perspective being on the right side of the road, and somebody being in the car or behind the car, in front of the car, we're all going to have slightly different perspectives. And so hearing all the perspectives, we'll get a more full picture of actually what happened. And so it's hard to do with history all these years later, but piecing together the historical evidence, piecing together the oral history of so many Native Americans who are still speaking up about this, and Indigenous peoples, as well as looking at the original sources, you know, from the Puritans themselves, which seem to indicate these are the things they were writing and saying about themselves. I think that one thing we can all center around is just gratitude that after COVID, we're alive, we're breathing, gratitude that we have food on the table when so many are unemployed still in this recession. And, you know, women in particular are suffering by, you know, this she session, they call it, of women having to leave work so they could school their kids at home because families. So just, I think centering around just gratitude is so
that's a good way to think
important.
About it.
And we can have different perspectives. I think that if there were a handful of good things that happened around that original Thanksgiving meal, it would have been people from very different perspectives being able to eat together and celebrating a harvest, you know, at that point. My experience living overseas, and I'm sure you had this too, is that when you sit down with people in a country that's not your own and you eat food that's from their land that is provided, and there is something beautiful about that feels like the good parts of Thanksgiving, that we can be from totally different continents and share this meal and be grateful for that relationship. If for nothing else, hopefully that is one thing we can somewhat maintain.
No, I think that's a really lovely way to look at it, because my gosh, we do have so much to be grateful for this year. The last couple of years, really, we're healthy, so lots of silver linings. So yeah, you're right. I like that.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be turkey. Not everybody's into that.
No, I don't like turkey. It's not my bird.
Exactly. No, it's funny because we several years ago, my family, you know, we lived in Asia for most of our raising of our children. So for my husband and I, it was 20 years of living there. But we had particular times when we would be back in the United States for job related things. And there was one particular Thanksgiving, maybe about 4 years ago, that we happened to be in the States. We were here in the Bay Area. And so we were like, oh, should we make some like American Thanksgiving food for this dinner? Which, you know, in Asia, our kids didn't get off school for that or anything. So it was always never on the day if you did celebrate with other Americans. And so we're like, yeah, our kids are off school right now. Let's just do the thing. But we lived in Cupertino at the time. And so, you know, most of our neighbors were Asian American. And there was a little girl who was friends of our kids, and she would always just knock on the door and be like, hey, can your kids come to the park to play? So she happened to knock on the door that day and walk inside, and her family is vegetarian, right? Because they're Hindu and they're from India. And she came and she saw this big turkey sitting on our table, and I thought she was going to pass out. I felt so bad. I was like, you're welcome to sit here. But she's like, did you guys literally just cook a bird? I know, I felt so bad. It's like cross-cultural right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. That is like the horrifying parts of it. But I think the beauty of my experience of being overseas, and there were things I ate that I would have ordinarily never put in my mouth, only because I didn't want to be rude and I wanted to like be respectful of people at their table or at the restaurant where they invite. I mean, I've eaten so many
You
things.
are a better woman than I am. I'll tell you. I just fake it and say, oh, you know, I'm not feeling so good today.
Good for you. Yeah, that's right.
I have allergies.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, it's true. I mean, in some cases you can do that. I think in more urban environments like Singapore, I could get away with it. But in like rural Sumatra, it was like, I'm just going to eat the ox brain. I mean, it's just weird. But like, yeah, like, okay, I'll just eat it. Unless I was pregnant, and then I was always off the hook for that because they were very much into like, what is your baby craving? You can eat that. And if your baby doesn't want something, it's totally fine. So I never got off the hook unless I was pregnant. So. Oh
my God.
I know.
I don't know. Oh my gosh, I struggle. Like, I think if you put something exotic in front of me, I don't know if I would be brave enough.
I do have my limits, I will say, but I've tried things I wouldn't have ordinarily tried, and some of them have been good, surprisingly okay. And others are like, I don't think I'll ever order that again. That was a bit slimy. So. I want to pause here for a moment to let you know about an art gallery in Austin, Texas called Wild Gallery. That's www.wyld.gallery. And if you don't live in Austin, Texas, they ship nationwide. And art is just one of those great Christmas gifts that you could buy for a loved one. But also around this time of year, when we've celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day in October, when we've had Thanksgiving in November, and a lot of us have recognized over the last several years that a lot of the narratives around Thanksgiving in the United States and Canada have not told the full story from the perspective of Native Americans in particular about really what was occurring around that original Thanksgiving and all the circumstances surrounding it. One of the many ways we can incorporate the voices of Native Americans into our history and into our lives so we understand their perspective is by buying art by Native American artists. So Wild Gallery in Austin, Texas features art of all price points. They have original fine art, prints, and posters, and they feature artists such as one of my favorites, which is J. Nicole Hatfield. And she has a painting called Sacred, which is highlighting the fact that Native American women are more than 10 times more likely than the rest of the population to be murdered. J. Nicole Hatfield's paintings are sold at Wild Gallery. She's a Comanche and Kiowa tribes, and she started painting at the age of 15 and is very talented. So if you're looking for Christmas gifts, if you're looking for a way to incorporate Native American voices and their perspectives into your life, go to wildgallery.com. And wild is spelled, once again, WYLD. So check it out. Well, I'd love to know in your travels of living in, Dubai, you lived in Bangalore, now you've lived here. What are some of the things from different cultures that you've appreciated that have, maybe you have incorporated into your own life or just they've taught you something?
Growing up in Dubai, I think I was incredibly sheltered. And I didn't quite realize it until I moved to India. And it's funny, I was having this conversation with my colleague this morning. The concept of personal space, it doesn't really exist in India because everyone's just living on top of each other. And in Dubai, all you have is space, right? Like people will, walk 2 feet away if you're walking down the street, or, if you're in the kiosk at an ATM, they'll respectfully wait outside. In India, that doesn't really happen. And the older I get, the more I'm grateful for my personal space, and I'm realizing how much I need it when I'm out in the world, especially with COVID. And that's the first thing that came to my mind, surprisingly.
Yeah, that's a big one. Personal space
Yeah.
is so cultural. My son the other day when we were at Disneyland, because my children they present as just straight up white kids, nobody knows that they only moved to America 2 years ago, and they learned Mandarin in their school growing up in Singapore, and they lived in Indonesia and Singapore. People just think they've been in California their whole lives, right? So when we were at Disneyland, the parade where they do the fireworks or whatever, there was a white lady next to my one of my sons, and she got really mad at him and said he was rude because he was too close to her. But like, he's lived in Asia for so long, in Singapore and Indonesia, where the personal space is more, close because there's so many people, and it's just a cultural thing. And so he didn't realize that I wonder if he had looked like he wasn't white, if she might have let him off the hook, but it's like, better, like you're a white kid, you should know what our personal space is, but I'm not sure he actually did.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So do you think he realized later on what was happening, or?
His sister made sure he understood. I think she picked up on what was happening, but even for her, I'm not sure she fully understood. So I had to be like, yeah, they see you as an insider in this culture, whether you see yourself that way or not. So it's almost like you're not going to be given the same amount of grace, I guess, because it looks like you should know this. You should know all about Thanksgiving, and you should love mashed potatoes, and you should, my kids are still learning a lot about what it means to be white American. Because I'm sure you relate to this, right? When you've lived in Dubai, and people look at you and they assume who you are. But when you've lived in a bunch of places, it's all kind of hidden inside of you. You know who you are, but other people may not. And so, yeah, like even you being married to a white German, people might assume if they see you out that your whole family is Indian, like the assumptions that people make. It can be quite hard. You feel quite misunderstood at times. I'm sure you've had those experiences. Yeah.
And primarily in India, I will say in Dubai, I think it was a lot easier. It was a lot easier to fit in, to have easy conversations. In India, I really struggled. And I think it was a lot to do with being a woman. like, why are you wearing a skirt? Like, why are you wearing high heels? It's a Tuesday. It doesn't make any sense to them. But this is how I was raised. And I don't think twice about it. Yeah, like with the personal space, that was a real shock to me because I didn't expect people to get quite so riled up about, like, come on, get closer. And I was like, why? The door's gonna slam me in the face when someone comes out. Like the lines aren't gonna move any faster if we're standing closer together. And they did not care because you're a woman, you be quiet and just move along, like I told you. And I was like, no, this is ridiculous. No. But it was things like that I really struggled with, was renting houses in India, because apparently being a single woman looking at apartments is a red flag. And they're like, yeah, where's your husband? Where's your father? Where's your brother? I'm like, I have none of the above. And it was being constantly told, well, we only rent to decent young women. And I was like, what does decent young women mean? I am a decent person. I'm educated. I have a full-time job. But yeah, it was challenging. It was incredibly challenging to live in India, being an Indian woman, even.
Yeah. So I assume that for me, it's been a little bit about what you're describing, and my kids would say the same. Being in a country that looks like where you're from when you've not lived there very much can be one of the hardest places for people who've lived the expat life, or what we call the third culture kid life, where you've grown up outside your passport country. And so, but as a woman in India in particular, I'm imagining a lot of scenarios. In your experience of having gone to live in India as someone who looked like they belonged and were born and raised there your whole life, what did you feel like the expectations on you were as an Indian woman?
To be quiet, to be traditional, to not work, probably. There was this constant, I don't know, like pressure I felt to assimilate, to fit in and do what all of the other kids were doing, which was, get a master's degree, get married, not work. Get married, you graduate, you get married, and then you have babies. It was, even reading certain books was, concerning to my family. It was like, wait, is that what you're reading? And I was like, yeah, it's just a book, like nothing to panic about. And also was, my family is Catholic, and that's all I ever knew. My friends were mostly Muslim because I grew up in Dubai. Very few Hindu friends. So when I moved to India, I wasn't familiar with all of these Hindu festivals and customs. Like I didn't know why they celebrate Diwali or Holi. And I still don't. I'm not gonna lie. Um right. So when people ask me, yeah, what are you doing for Diwali? I'm like, nothing. And there's just shock. What? Aren't you Indian? I'm like, yeah, but I'm Catholic, or I'm atheist now, but I was raised Catholic.
Yeah.
So it was sort of this expectation to conform to what an Indian woman should present as. And I did not in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I was working as a journalist, I lived alone, I didn't have any sort of male figure in my life. And that was all very concerning to my neighbors, my distant family members. It was like, what's happening? What's wrong? Are you broken? And that was incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, every
Yeah.
culture has expectations on what it means to be a woman, but every patriarchal culture in particular expects women to varying degrees of a spectrum to be small in some way, to take up
Yeah.
less space, either physically or career wise, or with your voice, like both the sound of your voice and what you say and how much you say, like all of those things are usually a part of it. And I would say, around the world, people have varying degrees of that. But my experience of my friends who are Indian women, talk about the particular nuances of India and how that can be very difficult to walk through. So as you have processed that and live in the States now, we have a large Indian community here in the Bay Area, lots of Indian friends here. And how do you perceive that now? And how do you walk through that as a woman who looks like an Indian woman in the Bay Area in California, in the North, and in California?
I honestly have no idea. There's nothing that I've consciously done. I have very few Indian friends. I honestly, if I'm being really truthful, my time in India was incredibly traumatic and painful, and I just could not wait to get out of there. So when I did finally leave, I really wanted nothing to do with India. Like, I don't watch the movies, I don't listen to music, and I had at the time very few Indian friends, and I was incredibly selective about the people I was letting into my life because I just didn't want to go through that sort of, I didn't want to be judged and critiqued for being different, for not conforming. And I'm glad to say that I do have Indian friends now. And, I think we're closely matched in our beliefs and our culture of being inclusive, forgiving, for talking about our mental states, which was never something I could do in India. So I've been incredibly selective about who I'm letting into my life while I'm here, because I'm not going through that again.
Yeah, no, that sounds really wise on your part to do. Not everybody can hold space for those types of traumatic feelings. And my experience of walking through any version of trauma, big or small, is that it's those conversations we have that help us walk through what that was all about, how we carry it in our bodies, whether it was a physical type of trauma or not, you still carry it in your body.
Yeah.
And you can be in situations years later, 15 years later, even, and it will kind of trigger you, even physically, sometimes to have a memory that flashes you back a little bit. But we do, not everybody can hold that space because not everybody is trauma informed enough to know how.
Yeah.
But there are those people we need to select in our lives, and we've gone through something hard like that can hold that space for us for however many times we need to have that flashback be talked about, because it's in the talking about it and letting that out that we kind of find more healing. So I'm glad you have people like that in your life here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, me too. I mean, I recognize that it's a lot of pressure to put on 1.3 billion people.
Right.
But I gotta pick and choose. I really do. I'm not ready to jump back in. I don't know if I'm ever gonna go back to India. I'm just not there yet.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly different, because for somebody like me to walk into India, there would never be the same expectations. It would, I would always be assumed to be different. It would be okay if I were. I mean, there are going to be norms that everybody's expected to adhere to, but the playing field I would be able to play on would be much larger than
For sure.
the narrow one they were giving to you. And so
Absolutely.
hopefully, and as you process it, it'll continue to be a space where you can be honest and authentic about what that experience was like for you, and to find space for others who are experiencing it. That's been my journey of anything I've gone through that's been difficult, is that as I've walked through healing, and I'm still in process with a few things myself even now, it's allowed me to have space for others who hurt, because it can either make you close off and never want to talk about it, and never let other people talk about painful things because you just don't want to deal. Or you can become the kind of person that says, you know what, I've been through hard things too. Let me listen to you and have you walk through that.
And I think this is something incredibly important for the Indian community. We don't often talk about our feelings. We're all about suppression and being strong, and somehow the burden we bear is like I don't know, like a medal. Like, oh my gosh, she's been through so much, so she is amazing, and that doesn't have to be the case. And I wish that more people would be open about having a bad day, even, or a bad week, something's not going right. Like, I want to listen. I want to hear you out and see if I can help you. But I think as a people, we're not very in touch with our feelings.
Yeah, it can be hard. Certain cultures are better at it than others, I would say.
Yeah.
And then you find within cultures particular spaces where it's allowed and where it isn't. And I will say, with all the difficulties of the patriarchy, on occasion it's women's circles in some cultures where that is within certain parameters a little more likely. I would say my experience in general, not everywhere, but some of the spaces around men where they're not allowed to cry, that's what it means to be a man, or being strong and never being weak. Like, shame is all around being weak for a lot of men in the patriarchy. And women are the first to say, sometimes, like, it's the wives and the daughters and the sisters that reinforce those stereotypes around the men, which keep them living in shame.
Yeah, I'm doing this new thing now. When someone asks me how I'm doing and I answer honestly, I no longer say I'm great, I'm good, everything's perfect. Oh, maybe I'm a little anxious today or a little bit low. And I was chatting with a friend yesterday, and I asked her how she was doing. And she was talking about how she's doing. She's anxious, all of these things going on. And she said, oh, and I feel like the men at work never feel this way. They're never overwhelmed, they're never burned out. And I said, that's not true. This is toxic masculinity. This is the patriarchy at work. They're probably feeling a lot more pressure than we realize. And they don't know how to, share that, how to communicate, like what words would they use. And I feel so sad because she and I can talk about it, but who are the men talking to? Probably nobody.
Yeah, it's so hard, and there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I'm, for the most part, I would say as a woman, I have to fight harder, twice as hard sometimes as a man to get the same kind of results in career or
Yeah.
life in general, but and to get the interview or any of those things. But at the same time, that is one particular, I'll often tell my daughter, like, these are one of the few female privileges we have, is that even if it's hard to share who we are, and we have a lot of shame when it comes to being a woman around being perfect, and all those things are really hard. But for men, it really is in some ways,
Much
even
harder.
more difficult. Yeah. But I find it very, strange. Like you talked about growing up Catholic and you're atheist now. One of the things that really I find so strange is men who claim to follow Jesus. And when I read about
Mhm.
Jesus, I'm sure you did as a child, he very much displayed his feelings. Like so I don't know if you remember this, but from growing up in any of your like church classes, but one of the favorite verses of when I was growing up of the kids to memorize is the shortest verse in the Bible, which is 2 words, and it's Jesus wept. So if there was
Mhm.
ever like, you have to memorize the Bible verse this week, people would choose that one because it's like the shortest one.
First one.
Yeah. But it's like, wow, can you imagine, like, this is the person that everybody's worshiping, that he's a model for how to live life. And that's the whole concept. But he wept, right? He wept. And
Yeah.
there's more than one story of Jesus crying. There's a story
Yeah.
of him being angry. There's sadness. And I think that sometimes the feelings most often we are not allowing each other to have are things like anger, fear,
Mhm.
and sadness. And
Right.
yet we see even Jesus displayed those. So I find it really sad, especially for men, that they're not often given the space to do that, because my
Mhm.
understanding is that humans are all looking for connection, that's
Mhm.
essentially what most of us are longing for. And the best way to find connection is that vulnerability to say, you know what, life's really hard right now, or I'm struggling with my child, or
Yeah.
mental health issues, like maybe I have depression, and you want to tell somebody about that. Like that kind of connection, it gives you a different level with people. And so it makes me, I lament that in our society. And I hope that that's something, whether your book is going to help us do that or whatever, that we get to the point where we don't judge people by their skin color, right? We don't think one gender is better than another.
Yeah.
Where you're born shouldn't matter as to who you are and what you can contribute now. How much is in your bank account shouldn't make a
Yeah.
difference, but it really, we should all be able to be vulnerable, because when it means to be human, as that we all struggle, and there's a lot of nuance, good and bad, in our lives.
Yeah. No, I feel like for the longest time, I was going through this phase where everything sucked. Like everything was breaking and everything was falling apart. And I thought, oh my gosh, like why is life so hard? Is it just me? And it felt like it was just me. Like I honestly felt like I was the only one in the world with all of these problems. And then I moved here to California, and we had this new person joining the team, and she's Indian. And she brought this presentation to talk about, her background and how she works, her working style. And the very last slide, she said, I want you to just take a moment and remember that everybody has struggles in their lives. You
Mm,
may not see it, they look totally perfect, they look happy, but everyone is struggling. This is not a lie. And it hit me like a truck. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, is that true? Is everybody around me struggling? And then I started to ask people, yeah, how are you really doing? Like, what's going on? And people opened up, and I realized it's not just me. And that was powerful. That felt I felt, I don't know, connected. Like it was just solitude, just knowing that it's not just me. I'm not the only one. And that
yeah.
was life changing. Right now, I walk into a room and I'm already assuming, I don't know what's going on in their lives, but I'm just gonna be more gracious, more gentle.
Mm,
I'm gonna cut them a slack for being 10 minutes late because I don't know, maybe their kids were acting up or car troubles, because I've had all of those because I'm late not because I'm an asshole, but because I have car trouble.
yes. Oh, absolutely. Or the traffic was just horrendous in the
Hmm.
Bay Area,
Right.
which is kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's a great posture. I agree. That's the power of Me Too, right?
Yeah.
When we find that connection, and that was why that hashtag went so viral, because people had that shame hidden
Yeah.
for so many years. And then it was like, wait, oh my gosh, me too.
Yeah,
You
me
know, there's
too.
power
Yeah,
in that. Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I'd love to get a chance to ask you this question that everybody in our series, on the Changemaker series, I'm asking. And that is, do you have people in your life, either authors you've read about or just activists or people you've followed, that have been change makers in some way, that have inspired you to be who you are, or to write, or to go into your career, or just anything? Is there somebody that you have found inspirational as a change maker that we should know about?
You know who it is? I think it might be right now in this moment, it's Padma Lakshmi. She is an author. She is the host of, I'm forgetting the name of her TV show, something with Chef in it, Top Chef, that's it. But what really, draws me to her is the fact that she is a Tamilian, like I am. And she's really setting the world on fire. Like she has this biracial kid whom she's raising to love food, and she's exploring different cultures, and she inspires me. Like when I grow up, that's who I want to be.
That's awesome. I love it so much. What is it about her that you really resonate with and you're trying to kind of add into your own life?
I think it's honestly the fact that she is a woman and two Tamilian, because typically when you think of Indians, you maybe think North Indians and North Indian food, but Tamilians, we never really shine. I'd never known any other Tamilians who were trailblazers, who were accomplishing things that you were hearing about in the news or hosted documentaries. And she's doing all of it, and she's bringing her own sense of power, feminism, and she inspires me. Like, I look at her and I think, you are everything I want to be. Like she is not afraid to speak her mind. I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check her out and be inspired as well. I definitely know that there have been so many women and men in my own life, people I've known personally or people I've watched from afar like her, that have given me, language around how to word particular things,
Mhm.
or just a posture of how to be in a room and to let my light shine, that I
Yeah.
believe God has given me. And we all have these God-given gifts to shine, and we're not supposed to hide them underneath a bush, or, it's supposed to be a way that we can all contribute to make a difference
Yeah.
in the world. And the more lights that shine together, the brighter it is, right? So
Yeah,
people like that, they
absolutely.
really can inspire us to be who we were meant to be and to not try to be small. I often think of, I'm not sure if you watch the show Ted Lasso, but we watched it twice. It's great. All the cross-cultural stuff. You should watch it. It's on
Okay.
Apple TV. But this American guy, Ted Lasso, goes to London to coach. And so it's a lot of the British versus American culture, which is really fun. But then there's a Nigerian player on the team, so there's some additional cultural things. But one of the things that happens is there's a woman who owns the football club,
Mm.
and there's a part where she talks about how before she goes into a meeting with all these men, because she's the only woman, that she literally like goes down with her body and raises up and like puts her arms out really wide and like growls like an animal to like practice being bigger in the room, because you're made to feel
Be
so
small.
small, especially when you're the only woman. And it's like her way of actually literally taking up a little more space. We just laughed because we watched it round two. My husband and I watched it with my daughter to like, because she loves all that cross-cultural stuff. But yeah, we just laughed out loud about that because it's kind of silly to think about doing. But at the same time, there are people that show us what it looks like to not be afraid of how your talents and gifts can bless the world.
Absolutely. And I think what really pulls me to Padma Lakshmi is that she is an incredibly beautiful, sensuous woman.
Mm,
And living in India, I always felt like I had to cover myself up, had to
mm,
dress a little bit manlier, put a little bit, less makeup, so I wasn't being sexualized, even going down to the supermarket. And I see her, and she is not afraid to be who she is. Like she is 52 years old, but she is incredibly gorgeous. And I think, I'm 30. Why am I so afraid? Like I was 21 and probably the best shape of my life, and I was so afraid of, wearing a skirt in public or a sleeveless top, and so stupid. I look back and it was so stupid to be afraid, and she's
wow.
not afraid.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
as women, we do need those women in our lives that show
Mhm.
us, you know what? When God created woman, my understanding is God said about both Adam and Eve that they were both very good and they were both
Yeah.
made in God's image. And and that God makes beautiful things. God created the mountains and the oceans and the sea creatures and all of it, and it's so beautiful. So when we look and we're in awe about God's creation, it's okay to be in awe about God's creation in the form of man and woman too. We don't have to hide that either. And obviously different cultures have different ideas about what it means to be pure and what you're supposed to cover up. We don't all walk around like people in Irian Jaya with no clothes on. I mean, everybody has to do that appropriately. But at the same time, there is a lot of, misogyny involved in some of the expectations around women. It's okay for us to be beautiful and that we can celebrate who we are in that way, in an appropriate way. And I'm sure, every culture has the nuance there, and pushing those boundaries as an Indian woman has to be challenging. I've faced that living in Muslim cultures under Islamic law, Sharia law. It's a huge challenge, but I resonate so much with what you're saying, because I've had women in my life that showed me how to do that well. That, it's not about never wearing makeup. Some women, they choose that, but to feel forced into that, to feel like you can never show your body in any way, especially like when I played sports, and it's like, there's a lot of conversation even now around the, Olympic teams and the different standards of what bathing suits can and can't be. So I think all of those are conversations to push us forward into hopefully a better society that your book is talking about. It's okay to be a woman. It's okay to be a sensual woman. It's okay to be a beautiful woman, because we need to celebrate who we are. And I love that you've seen that and had an example. I definitely have people like that have shown me. And I hope that for the younger generation of little Indian girls and girls everywhere, that we can show them that it's okay. Obviously, that's a lot of the conversation around #MeToo, right? That it felt unsafe for some women to be beautiful, but it shouldn't be like that.
No, I always felt like I was hiding behind a helmet, a scarf, something. I mean, I love wearing skirts and high heels, and I often felt ridiculed. Like, why are you wearing high heels? Like, would you have a hot date? I'm like, no, just coming into the office. No, it's not a big deal. It was little things that struck me as odd, and I over time thought, oh my gosh, I got to dress more conservatively because I don't want to draw attention to myself because it's not safe. But these are the best years of my life, and I don't want to hide anymore.
Good for you. Good for you. Celebrate who you are. I think you're a wonderful person. I look forward to reading your book and hearing your thoughts come through fiction. And I'm sure you'll be writing more. So we want to continue to follow you and your thoughts. Where can people find you to see more of your writing and what you're doing on social media?
Right. So you can buy Corinth 264280. That's what the book is called, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Several bookstores across the US have it. So just walk in and ask for a copy. You can follow me on Instagram. It's author Bindiya Schaefer. That's Bindiya Bindiya. On Twitter, it's just @Bindiya Schaefer, and same on Facebook.
Wonderful. Yes. Everybody follow her, because she's going to be writing more and more. I'm really excited to see what else you put out there. One last question, because our family is a camping family, and I noticed that you are too. Where do you like to go camping? Where's one of your favorite places?
Oh my gosh, Big Sur. Big Sur is one of our favorite spots. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Which campground do you go there?
We don't go to a campground.
Okay.
We disperse camp. We just drive up the mountain, find a spot, and camp. Another good spot is Stanislaus. National Forest, National Park. Yeah. Really, really beautiful. Yeah, we don't do campgrounds. We disperse camp.
Love it. That's awesome. Yes, we're so blessed here in California with not only a beautiful ocean, but cliffs in addition to the ocean. We always drive down the coast and we just think, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Where do you guys camp?
We have not camped on the beach so far. We've done a lot of Yosemite. My husband, he's addicted to Yosemite. We also went like further up near Redding in that area. There's some really beautiful places, but
near Oregon.
We've always wanted to do Big Sur, and so that's next on our list. So we're definitely
highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, you'll love it.
We will. Well, it's great to get to know you. Let's keep in touch and try to have coffee sometime. Everybody follow Bindiya and read her upcoming book. Tell us the name of your book again.
My book is Corinth 264280.
All right, we will link it in the show notes so all of you can find it and buy it and read it and be inspired about a society that we can make a world of difference to create together. Great to meet you, Bindiya. Have a great day.
Lori. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
What a gift Bindiya has given us today. Just her vulnerability, her authenticity, her willingness to share stories from her own life that were parts of struggle, both in the past and that she's currently walking through. And it's just another one of the many reasons that we want to listen to the voices of the people around us, the people who live close to us in our communities and the people who live far, because living this human life means that our perspective is not the only perspective. We can learn so much from others, especially people who are opposite of who we are, especially people who look different from us, have been raised in different places from us, who have different careers than us and interests than us, and it just informs us of how to live this human life in better ways. We're just always trying to do better, aren't we? Here on the World of Difference podcast, I know that many of you are different and making a difference everywhere, and Bindiya has really offered us this gift of her book, helping us to imagine a world where people are not judged by their skin color. Wouldn't it be wonderful? So check out her book. We'll put it in the show notes. Follow her writing. I'm sure she's going to be writing more. And enjoy the perspective that she brings. Somebody who was living in Bangalore, India, and looked like she belonged and then really didn't feel like she did. And now here in the Silicon Valley or in the San Francisco Bay Area, just, writing, camping, and offering us a perspective of somebody who made the jump from being a journalist into the corporate world, and just all the things she's learned through her life experience living in Dubai and the UAE. What a gift she's given us today of all these stories and the gift of imagination of what it could look like if we did better around this issue of judging people and learning to just accept people for who they are and listen to their perspective. Love it so much. She's incredible. And I hope that you will follow her on all the spaces. We'll put her links in the show notes so you can follow her. And enjoy our guest next week, who is Christina Corpus, and she is running for sheriff in San Mateo here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area in California. If elected in June, on June 7th, I believe, she will become the first female sheriff in San Mateo, and also would be, if elected, the first Latina sheriff in all of the state of California. So we're excited to have her on next week. Tune in next week for Christina Corpus and make a difference wherever you are. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper, and then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.